And I know that you were excited to be here as usual. But what I want to do today is let's look at some different microorganisms. We've already studied viruses a little bit. We learned how they make you sick, learned different little cycles that they go through. But what about other types of sickness that we have? I'm sure you've gotten sick before with maybe, I don't know, a stomach getting sick, or I don't know, you might have heard of somebody getting a staph infection or something like that. Well, those aren't caused by viruses. Sometimes you have something called a quote-unquote stomach virus, and it may be indeed a virus, but sometimes it's these other things. These other things called bacteria. So right quick, what I want you to do is go on to Blackboard and download this little sheet that I've got that we're going to complete as we go through this Odyssey video. And I'm going to walk you through with it because I'm not here, and I would like for y'all to make sure that you get everything you need to out of the video. So let's go to Lessons. Then let's go to Microorganisms, which all this you shouldn't see on yours. And then let's go to Odyssey Bacteria. Download that Pages document. Alright, and it's just 7 simple questions with 2 discussion questions. Shouldn't be a big problem. So I'm going to move it over here to another desktop. And let's get started with the Odyssey video. And this Odyssey video is relatively short. I'm going to be right here the whole time. I'll stop it occasionally and kind of talk about some things. I am actually going to bring up notes. You can do this if you want to. So we can take notes if we need to. So, alright, let's get started.
Hey, I'm Jason. Let's talk about bacteria. You probably hear about it often, but did you know that bacteria cells are prokaryotic and that there is a bacteria domain and an archaea domain?
Might want to
Comparing these
remember
two
that.
domains to the eukarya domain, we'll also compare sexual reproduction to asexual reproduction and look at binary fission. So what do the two domains consisting of prokaryotic organisms have in common? Let's find out.
Alright, so far what have we got? Well, we saw that there are 3 domains of life. And they are let's go bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Eukarya. There we go. Alright, so these are the big 3 domains of life. And so, I wonder if that may be a question on our sheet. Not quite, but that's still important stuff that we need to remember. Okay? So let's continue watching.
You guys know that nowadays we use this system of classification called the 3-domain system. And you know, it wasn't too long ago, and some of you may have even heard this term, where we didn't have a bacteria kingdom or domain and an archaea domain. We had lumped both of these into a domain called Monera, okay? So if you had heard that somewhere and learned it that way, you need to relearn it now, all right? Because these two things are separate domains, and I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, were we stupid? Why did we put these things in the same grouping? Well, it's because bacteria...
Alright, right quick. Let's do this right here. This is important information right here. All this that he puts over here on the right side is important. So let's say we've already got the 3 domains of life, but what in the past they were grouped together called what? So let's write that down. In the past, archaea and bacteria were grouped in the same group or grouper or domain. Okay, that's something we might need to remember right there because you may have to see that on our worksheet. But we haven't quite answered any of these yet. But this will be important later.
and archaea have an awful lot of things in common that you can see. What we didn't realize was their DNA, and that's going to be the last thing I tell you in this discussion. But let's talk about the things that bacteria and archaea have in common. Now, they're both one-celled, pretty much one-celled organisms, and they both look an awful lot like this or some rendition of this. Okay, so let's talk about what you're going to see in a bacteria or an archaea. Pretty much you're going to see no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles at all, right? Which really makes them different than the eukaryotes, which have membrane-bound organelles. The DNA is found just kind of floating loosely in the cytoplasm, so it has cytoplasm, right? But it's got loose DNA. Sometimes it has these little small circles of DNA called plasmids, okay? Eukaryotes are not going to have that, but these guys might. Right? It's also going to have structures called ribosomes, but they're different than eukaryotic ribosomes. Right? They have a totally different formation. They're also going to have a cell wall, but this is a very different cell wall than a plant cell wall. It's made out of a totally different chemical, and yet they will have this cell wall. You're starting to see the reason this could be confusing. Right? They're going to have some other things. They're going to have flagella, bacterial flagella. Very different than the flagella of, say, of a euglena, a one-celled organism. But these flagella are wacky, man. I mean, you can have, look at all the different kinds of flagella. You can have 1, 3. It's to help the bacteria move around. Well, and the archaea too. Got to remember, there's bacteria and archaea. All right, what else? We've got these things called pilus or pili, plural. Now, these are very interesting little structures. These pilus are...
Let's stop right there and get this stuff right here. Uh-oh. There we go. All right, so what do the two domains archaea and bacteria have in common? Well, you can do this one of two ways. And honestly, the way I like to do it is screenshot this little area right there. Alright, we've got that now. So that's great. Now I'm going to put C screenshot on desktop. So let's just look and see if we got anything yet. What does archaea domain and bacteria domain have in common? Did we just screenshot that? I think we did. So, what do they have in common? No nucleus? Good. No membrane-bound organelles? Good. DNA is located in the cytoplasm? Good. And so, what I would like for you to do is just write down some of those. So, no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles, loose DNA strands, cell wall, and you can put as many as you want, but that's plenty right there. So, well, we might can answer number 2 too. Archaea and bacteria have no what? Well, they have a bunch of things that don't exist, like no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. So, there you go. We've already answered 2 of them just off one little screenshot that I took. So, do you see how easy this is? This is not hard at all.
These pili are hair-like structures that can actually be used for grappling, but they may be used for other things. And that might come into a little discussion on bacterial reproduction. You know, most of you probably know that bacteria reproduce by splitting, a process called binary fission, right? And in that, the DNA doubles, and then they split down the middle and split into 2 new cells. That's to be expected.
Let's write that down right there. So bacteria reproduce by, and what was it called? Binary fission. And this is just like mitosis and meiosis. You start with 1 cell, and out of that 1 cell you get 2 new cells. The only thing that's bad about binary fission is that the DNA is exactly the same. You have no room for evolution to happen, because evolution just change in DNA over time. And if you have the same DNA here and end up with the same DNA here, no evolution happens. So that's a problem sometimes. So bacteria reproduce by binary fission, where how many cells? 1 cell splits into 2 cells. Or one bacteria, say bacteria, splits into 2 bacteria. And what did I say about the DNA? The DNA remains unchanged.
But what you probably don't realize is that bacteria can also have a process called conjugation, a sexually reproducing process. And what happens with that is two bacteria will line up side by side, and because of the pilus, what they will grow is they will grow a tube called a conjugation tube. And in this conjugation tube, what can happen is the DNA from one can actually move into the other cell.
Well, that's interesting. So, bacteria can also use this thing called conjugation. And it's kind of like sexual reproduction, which it is a form of sexual reproduction, like he just said. And so, how many cells are involved in conjugation? He drew up here how many? 2, right? So, we might need to write that down too. So, bacteria also reproduce by conjugation. Conjugation. This is a form of what? Where did it say it at? Right there. Sexual reproduction. This is really important because that changes. I'll tell you in just a second. So this is a form of sexual reproduction which allows bacteria to share DNA. This is really important because this is how, have you ever heard of MRSA staph? If you haven't, MRSA staph is a staph infection that's really, really nasty because it doesn't have any, it's what I'm trying to say, it is antibiotic resistant. And so what happens is you can't really treat it like normal. And that's a problem because you really want to get well and you really want to cure that staph infection, but you can't because it's antibiotic resistant. And this allows that to be antibiotic resistance. You have a couple cells that may have mutated and gotten into some new genes that allows it to be antibiotic resistant. Well, it spreads that genes and those genetics through this conjugation to other bacteria. But it's very cool because that makes bacteria able to reproduce in multiple ways. If you just have one, it can reproduce by this and make many more. Or if you have tons of bacteria, they could also reproduce by conjugation where they share their DNA and can mutate on you and evolve. So let's continue watching.
Thus, you see the word conjugation. They conjugate together and exchange DNA. That's sexual reproduction. So these pilus can also, or these pili can also be used in sexual reproduction. And then last but not least, these bacteria may also have a slimy coat to kind of protect them from things. There's one bacteria that causes a human disease called tuberculosis, where the slimy coat actually keeps your white blood cells from eating it, and the white blood cells surround that bacteria and keep it alive. And the bacteria lives in your white blood cells, so instead of destroying it, you're giving it a place to live. So, I said before, well, then why aren't these things considered the same? Why have we switched them and said, oh, bacteria and archaea are different than eukarya? Well, there's a reason for that, and it comes to our modern knowledge of bacteriology and molecular genetics. Because you want to know something? When I look at the DNA of archaea, and I look at the DNA of eukarya, and I look at the DNA of this group called bacteria, we find out that there are a whole lot more similarities in the DNA of these two organisms.
Well, that's interesting.
And so we have realized, holy mackerel.
So why are they not grouped together? Well, you have archaea and eukarya are more similar in DNA than bacterial DNA is with the rest of the group. So you have a similarity in DNA which says, they're kind of in the same group. We need to group those together. So we will make sure that we group these two together from now on because they are more similar in DNA.
Don't have two different things here. We have three different things: a bacteria domain, an archaea domain, and a eukarya domain. And that's why we've set it up like this.
Let's get this straight. Archaea and bacteria used to be grouped together. and are structurally similar all the way
Need
down
to
to how
write
they
that down.
reproduce. But advances in DNA processing have revealed that archaea are more closely related to eukarya, or the eukaryotes. You know, us.
All right, so he said the archaebacteria and bacteria were grouped together, but since advances in DNA technology have discovered that bacteria are not similar with archaea, and instead the archaea are more similar to eukarya. So that's pretty cool. All right, so let's answer some questions right quick.
Let's test your knowledge with a few questions. So there's this pond behind my house. One day, for kicks, I took a sample of the water and looked at it under a microscope. This is what I saw.
Okay, so we see a nucleus, a chloroplast, a
Going by
vacuole,
this
and a flagellum.
classification chart, why would I not classify this organism as a type of bacteria?
So let's think about this for a second. Eubacteria, which is just a type of bacteria. Well, let's look at our notes for a second. Archaeobacteria have in common, see screenshot on the desktop. All right, so let's flip over here. They have no nucleus. Uh-oh. Is that a nucleus? Yes, it is. So that means it cannot be a bacteria. So it has to be a something else. I don't know what yet, but let's try to figure it out. It is single-celled, but it has a nucleus and it has other things. So let's choose this one.
Right on. This cell has a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. So we can confirm, in looking at this organism, the presence of a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. And the chart tells us that the main characteristic of eubacteria is that they do not have a nucleus or membrane-bound organelles. Therefore, we cannot call this organism eubacteria. So what is it? Protista. Yep.
All right, good. And we'll study about protists here in a little while. Just remember that if it doesn't have a nucleus and doesn't have membrane organelles, it is not, no nucleus, no membrane organelles, it is not eukarya, so therefore it must be some sort of bacteria or archaebacteria.
Know what else was in my pond water? Bacteria. Yep. And they were reproducing. What type of reproduction is pictured here?
Let's look at this for a second. All right, we have this little structure right here joining two bacteria together. And we called that what? What did we call that? Bacteria also reproduce by conjugation. That was it, conjugation. So we want to make sure that if you have a pilus, remember, that joins two bacteria together, that's conjugation. Well, what kind of reproduction is that? Well, we wrote that down earlier. That is sexual reproduction. So,
Good show. This is sexual reproduction. Bacteria can reproduce sexually, as shown here by a process of conjugation, in which a pilus from one bacteria extends to another bacteria and acts as a bridge for genes
Good morning. We'll have
from one
a
bacteria
faculty
cell to
meeting
the
in
other.
the media center at 7:30. About 5 minutes in the media center at 7:30.
okay, thank you for the announcement. All right, let's move on.
So, we can sum up the similarities and differences between eubacteria and archaebacteria using a Venn diagram.
What can we infer from the diagram?
All right, so let's look at the diagram. Eubacteria, sequence of DNA is not similar to eukaryotes. Sequence of DNA is similar to eukaryotes, and then they're all unicellular, they lack nucleus, and they lack membrane-bound organelles. All right, so let's look at this. Eubacteria are more closely related to eukaryotes. Is that true? Not so much. Archaebacteria are more closely related to eukaryotes. Now that I would say is true because we have sequence of DNA that is similar to eukaryotes. Eubacteria have a cell structure more like that of eukaryotes. Not really. Archaebacteria have a cell structure more like that of eukaryotes. Even though their DNA is a little bit like archaebacteria, they're still unicellular, they don't have nucleus, and they don't have membrane-bound organelles. So that's a problem. So let's go with B.
Oh, yeah. We can infer that archaebacteria are more closely related to eukaryotes. When looking at the diagram, we see that archaebacteria's sequence of DNA is similar to eukaryotes. So, the closer the DNA sequence, the closer the relation. Okay, so let's look at what we've covered. We compared eubacteria and archaebacteria and linked archaea closely to the eukaryotes. And we looked at asexual and sexual reproduction in all forms of bacteria. Who would have thought that an organism with only one cell would have so much going on?
Rock and roll.
Well, looks like it's that time again. See you around.
All right, so good job, guys. Way to stay with me. All right, I'm going to move this over here to this other desktop. Hopefully that you have most of this stuff, and you should be able to answer every one of these really easy with these notes. And that's what I want you to start doing when we do Odyssey. Take some notes, take some screenshots. It makes life a whole lot easier. It makes Odyssey fly by, and you can get done with it in just a few minutes. So, like I said, I'm going to leave this right here, let you look at it for a few seconds, and then, as you heard on the announcement, I've got to go to a meeting. So, y'all please behave for the sub. And for those of you that's going to be watching this later, which will be third and sixth period, no sub for you. You'll probably have a meeting. So, hope you enjoyed it, guys. Have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.